During a journey, Mao saw a banner in a field praising the merits of the first experimental People's Commune set up in Henan province. He declared with enthusiasm, "The People's Commune will be the bridge that will carry China towards the socialist paradise." The saying was taken up in all provinces, and in just one summer, thousands of communes were formed. They consisted of up to 2,000 families. There were even plans for enormous communes, combining up to 10 or 20,000 households, which would be headed by cadres who were totally dedicated to Mao. The working days started at dawn and finished after dark, accompanied by music to the glory of the Great Leap Forward. As the basic unit of the future society, the Commune experimented with a completely new way of life. Here, everything was designed to immerse the individual in a collective life geared towards production. All private property was abolished. Houses, animals, land and production tools became collective property. Nurseries and free, compulsory schools liberated women from their maternal duties so they could work in the fields.
At that time I was very young. I was a member of the Youth League and in charge of propaganda, so that shows that I believed in communism. I thought communism was fantastic. From when we were tiny, we were taught that the communist paradise would soon come, and we only had to endure a little suffering and make a few sacrifices to reach it. That was how I saw things.
The family unit disappeared, and children were made to live by the new rules of collective life. The individual was nothing more than a cog in a big machine.
I think the words were, "Socialism is good," something like that, but I can't really remember. Did you sing different songs when you were at home? We only sang in school. Outside, life was very hard. There was never any let-up. Why would we want to sing?
As in a barracks, men and women were separated and grouped in dormitories. Sexual relationships were regulated.
Men and women were separated and couldn't live a married life. Some couples went to the fields to continue their sex life, but when they were caught, they were publicly humiliated. Some women found it unbearable and many committed suicide.
So you pulled everything and all lived together?
The household items were pooled in the first year. The furniture was seized for firewood and everything that could be destroyed was destroyed. The pigs, the sheep, everything was collectivized. Even the pots and pans were seized because families weren't allowed to cook. No one cooked at home anymore.
The aim was to force the peasants to take their meals in the commune's collective canteens. In some of them, they even abolished money. A system of work points was established. Food was distributed according to merit, i.e., each person's capacity to fulfill the production objectives. The notion of wages disappeared.
It was compulsory to turn up every day. If your name wasn't on the attendance list, you were punished and you lost work points. They took points away from you. Yes. But without work points, you had nothing to eat. The fewer work points you earned, the less food they gave you. Oh, it was miserable. I can tell you that life was brutal for everyone at that time, except the cadres. Those people lived well.
Kill! Kill!
The party cadres became the officers of the people's communes, which were transformed into real barracks. Every day, the peasants underwent military training because the masses had to be mobilized for the national defense.
Every morning the peasants gathered at the entrance to the village and waited for the group leader to allocate the tasks. At the end of the day, the leader shouted, "Work's over!" and the peasants went to eat. They weren't motivated and productivity was very low. That was one reason why productivity didn't increase.
In the people's communes, peasants had no right to free speech. Their skills weren't taken into consideration anymore. Everything was decided by the authorities who mostly knew nothing about the subject. They decided everything. The distance between each rice seedling, the type of seed, the amount of fertilizer to be used. Land suitable for one type of crop was used for another. As a result, the peasants became totally demotivated and poor harvests caused the first food shortages. But Mao always wanted more. To increase agricultural production, he made communes compete against each other. The ones that recorded the biggest harvests were rewarded in ceremonies organised by the party, while the inhabitants of the communes were terribly short of food. This was a world where achieving record production, called launching a satellite, went hand in hand with announcing falsified figures. The cadres were caught up in an escalating spiral.
At the provincial meeting, my superiors asked me what I thought about it all. Some places have launched plenty of satellites and declared high levels of production. What do you think? My back was against the wall and I had to say that I would respect the quotas without fail. But in reality, I couldn't keep those commitments. It was impossible.
They showed Soviet advisors a field of wheat where the ears were so extraordinarily close together that they supposedly supported the weight of 6 people. The photo was on the front page of the People's Daily. Everyone was fooled, and those who weren't were too scared to say it was a con. Lying became common at all levels of the hierarchy. The figures for agricultural and industrial production were falsified throughout the country to meet and even exceed the targets set by the party.
In the autumn of 1958, although there was some wheat, there was a shortage of food. The town of Dangshang in the region of Jiangsu boasted about good harvests, and we went to take a look. It was supposed to be a fertile area. Everyone who went quickly realized that it was all nonsense. They showed us piles of crops where the cereals were on the top, but underneath was just straw and stubble. Everyone understood what they'd done, but no one dared talk about it. I saw the trick too.
As a consequence of these exaggerations, the tax paid in grain by the communes was calculated on a false basis. In some regions, the result was that the state demanded almost all the amounts really harvested. To make matters worse, the spring harvest in 1959 was disastrous.
The wheat had hardly been cut when all the members of the commune were made to carry the crops on their back to a boat which took them away. They did it at night by torchlight. As soon as the crops were gathered, the wheat was taken away. Yes. They were shipping it out to pay debts. Yes. Do you know which country had to be paid back? How would I know? So who told you that the debts had to be paid? The cadres said that. At every harvest, Deng Xiaoping said debts had to be repaid even if the country was very poor. Did they leave you a little bit or not? A few kilograms. Far too little to feed us till the next year.
The famous debt was the one that China had contracted with the USSR for the purchase of hundreds of factories that were delivered ready for use. Beijing undertook to repay Moscow in the form of agricultural produce. Mao wanted to accelerate repayment, even if it meant people starving in the countryside. In some regions, people really had nothing to eat.
I was sent out of the village on a mission, but the members of my family who stayed behind were reduced to eating the bark of medlar trees.
Tree bark?
Yes, tree bark. They ate the roots of banana trees too, anything they could find. People also ate mud, a sort of white mud. Stems of rice too. We were so hungry that we filled our stomachs with whatever we could find. Once I saw an adult collapse. He fell to the ground while trying to eat a sort of bean paste. He died in front of me, and he still had the food in his mouth. So I laid him under a tree. We were so hungry that soon afterwards we started eating the leaves of that tree.
In other provinces, the shortage of food gave the cadres who distributed it the power of life or death over the inhabitants of the commune.
In theory, peasants were entitled to 250 grams per day, but the cadres allocated themselves much more. They were so corrupt that they stuffed themselves shamelessly. Those who didn't get on with the leader of the production team or those who disobeyed his orders were starved to death.
He who does not work shall not eat. That is the principle that was applied from 1958 to 1962, meaning that entire categories of people deemed to be unfit, deemed to be too weak or vulnerable, pregnant women, were deliberately cut off from the canteens and starved to death. That qualifies as murder.
Were the cadres here very violent?
Yes, very cruel. I remember that when they caught some peasants who had stolen some roots from the fields, they tied them up from head to foot. In village number 8, one violent cadre beat several people to death. The collective canteens became a sort of weapon in the hands of the cadres who managed them. I know of many examples, like the case of one man in charge of a collective canteen in a village in the province of Qinghai, who one day summoned a very beautiful woman. She was suffering a lot from the famine, and the cadre asked her how many days it was since she had eaten. Then he ordered her to undress. When he saw her naked, he said, "Why are your breasts shriveled?" The woman answered, "My chest is now as flat as a man's." The cadre demanded that she bring him her daughter. Her daughter was very young, but she accepted, in exchange for 2 miserable loaves of bread. She killed herself soon afterwards.